All right, so my name is James Jackson. I'm going to walk you through this lesson learned presentation. Um, this one's about surveys, so let's go ahead and get started. First, let's talk about what you should be using surveys for. So, they are not good for getting your customers to innovate for you. You got to make sure you do your homework. If you don't know what questions to ask because you haven't done your ethnographies or done interviews, you're going to get really bad data from your surveys. So, you got to make sure you do your homework. Um, do those interviews, do the ethnographies. You got to know your customers before you can survey them. But surveys are good for confirming insights that you get from these ethnographies and interviews, and they're really good for getting statistical data. So once you know the questions you're asking, you can reach out to that bigger group and see how big is the pain I'm looking at. Do other people does it resonate with other people? Um, Also, you're going to be making presentations for the Crocker Fellowship and for investors and competitions. Having statistical data is the only way that you can really prove to other people that what you're saying is right. So you're going to be doing a lot of surveys to prove that your insights that you're showing are true. Um, so let's talk about once you realize that. Let's go ahead and talk about doing it. So surveys are going to be an experiment. Now, in an experiment, you usually have some small sample of a really large population. This small sample is small enough that you can manipulate it and you can sort of do things, but it ultimately has to represent the larger population. So, when you're designing your surveys, you got to remember this. The questions that you ask need to be honest questions, and they have to be designed properly. So make sure you design your questions to really reflect what you're trying to get at. Secondly, and maybe even most importantly, is figuring out who's going to take your survey. So you're not going to represent the entire population of the United States if you only talk to 25 of your best friends. Though it's tempting to do that because it's easy to get a hold of your friends, but it's hard to talk to people who are really in your demographic, and that's just a problem inherent with what you're doing, and you gotta try and get over that. And so I'm going to talk to you about how to do this. How do you get 100 strangers to take a survey that you wrote? And that can be a real challenge. And so here's some ideas that have worked for us, that have worked for me in the past that I kind of wanted to share with you. So one way is using pay per response. So many of you, I'm sure, have heard of the Qualtrics. They're kind of a BYU baby. What they do is they'll make a survey and then you tell them how many responses you want and then you pay them basically to get those responses. So you can tell them I want mothers aged 35 to 40, mothers of 3 who work part-time, and they can do that. It'll cost you. Qualtrics tends to be, a little bit expensive, actually quite expensive. So it's usually between $5 to $15 a response, but they'll do it for you, and they usually have very good data. So that's one avenue you can take. SurveyMonkey is a direct competitor with Qualtrics, but they aren't able to dive down so far in your demographic. So, and actually in the past we've seen that they haven't actually always fully represented our demographic. They've, cut a few corners a little here and there. However, they have been useful and they are quite a bit cheaper than Qualtrics. So if Qualtrics is 10 to 15, SurveyMonkey's like 10 to 5. So, you got to weigh your costs there. Google Consumer Surveys is something that came out just recently, and it's a really interesting option. It's much cheaper, but it's more limited in how deep you can dive. So, like for example, this last semester, I sent a survey to 750 people aged 35 to 45 in the United States, and that was 10 cents a question, just the one question I was allowed to ask, and that was it. And it was great, and we got our data. We got our data cheap and easy and fast. And so, I would suggest looking into Google consumer surveys because that can be a quick way to get a huge customer base all at once. Make sure you ask the right question. So Amazon Mechanical Turk is an interesting option. I really wanted to try this, but I never really had the chance, and so I'm planning on doing it my next time around. But Mechanical Turk is something Amazon's put up that you can set like really tedious tasks that can't be done by the computer but have to be done by a human being. That's kind of what it was designed to do, but you could use it with Typeform, which Typeform doesn't buy you survey responses, but they do have a really good survey platform where you can write surveys. So you put a type form up on Amazon Mechanical Turk, and you can pay people to take it. You will have to finagle how you get the right demographic to take your survey, but it's just an interesting option. So if you don't want to pay someone else to find your people for you, you've got to find those people yourself. And these are some things that I've wanted to show you because they worked for us. So if you have any sort of a tech startup, I would strongly suggest you list it on Beta List, Killer Startups, and Early Bird. These websites have a huge number of early adopters, and it's likely that if you list on all three of these websites, you will have, close to 700 people sign up in the first week or so. These people will all be early adopters. They won't all try your app, but they will. Most of them will, and you'll have this huge email list that you can survey. So MailChimp is another service I put up here. MailChimp is a batch emailer for Gmail. So you can send 200 emails all at once. That's really helpful for when you have these big email signups that you want to send them all a survey, you want to send them all a beta. Go ahead and use MailChimp. However, a lot of you are not going to have products that are perfect for beta list. So in that case, you're going to have to be scraping some data, and this is a very manual task. It takes forever. I'm sorry, but it's just kind of what has to happen. There is some legal things you want to be wary of. So you might have a really smart computer scientist in your group who's able to scrape data from these websites. So oftentimes you can find public listings of websites. You have to get kind of creative, but you can usually find email repositories. It is illegal, however, to script the download of these emails and then batch email them. That is illegal. But you can copy and paste these emails, put them in an emailer, and send it. So that's allowable, but you can't do it automatedly. That's illegal. That's called hacking. So just be careful of that. It does make your work a lot more tedious and long. However, when you have this, I would strongly suggest you install MailTrack on your Gmail. So I put that right here. This is a little icon next to Gmail. MailTrack, what it is, it's a little tiny image that when someone opens your email, it loads that image, and then MailTrack keeps track of that so that you can know how many of your emails were opened. So this is helpful if you're sending a whole bunch of emails with different subject lines to try and gauge interest in email subject lines. So you can tell how many got opened and how many didn't. That's some good data. Finally, anything that you do, you should always be tracking it with Google Analytics. So say you have these three: Beta List, Killer Startup, and Early Bird, and you have signups from each of these. I would strongly suggest that you have 3 copies of the same survey, each with their own Google Analytics code on them. So you can tell which site is driving the most traffic, so you can know where to focus your energy. Google Analytics is really easy to use. You get on, and they give you a URL or a HTML block that you put on whatever website you want tracked. And anyone who loads that website, or Google will track it, and you can tell when it was, how many people, and from each website. So if you have 3 copies of the same survey, you can tell which ones got opened, which ones got finished, where people are coming from, that sort of thing. If you have a website, you can do different landing pages with different Google Analytics numbers on or codes on them. So, I mean, it's a really cool thing to do. So put Google Analytics on everything you have. You want that data because you want to see where your traffic is coming from, who these people are, and that sort of thing. So this is really all I've got for you. These are some really cool tools. I hope you have a good experience surveying.